The journey for Sarah and Tor Roberts was far from smooth. As Sarah began to take her place at the helm, it quickly became evident that the transition wasn't just about shifting roles within the church, it was about redefining the very foundation of what T.D. Jakes had built. The pressure of balancing the legacy of her father with her own ambitions was constant. Sarah wasn't just navigating a ministry, she was navigating a storm of public scrutiny, personal doubts, and overwhelming expectations. Yet, in the midst of all this chaos, something profound began to happen. Sarah was beginning to find her own voice. But just when it seemed like things might start to settle down, another unexpected twist changed the trajectory of their lives. Tor Roberts, once just the supportive husband behind the scenes, found himself facing his own battle, one that would test not just his faith, but his entire relationship with Sarah. You see, Tor had always been content with playing a secondary role. He loved being the support system for Sarah, watching her thrive in the spotlight. But deep down, there was always a nagging feeling that he was more than just the first husband. Tor had his own ambitions, his own calling, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. As Sarah began to take on more responsibilities at the church, Tor found himself questioning his place in the grand scheme of things. Was he just an accessory to her success, or did he have something valuable to contribute to the ministry in his own right? The problem, however, was that Tor wasn't sure how to approach this. He was inextricably tied to Sarah's rise. His identity was wrapped up in her success, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he had his own purpose. The question was, would he be able to break free from being just a supportive partner, or would he stay in the background forever? This internal struggle came to a head in a private conversation between Sarah and Tor, a moment that neither of them had anticipated. Tor finally spoke up, revealing the frustration he had been feeling for months. He admitted that he loved supporting Sarah, but he also felt like he was losing himself in the process. He wanted to have his own voice, his own role, not just as her husband, but as a leader in his own right. It was an emotional moment, one that took both of them by surprise. Sarah was taken aback at first, unsure of what this meant for their relationship. Could she handle sharing the spotlight, or was she too consumed by her own journey to give Tor the space he needed? What followed was a series of deep conversations, late-night talks that explored the heart of their marriage and ministry. Sarah realized that Tor's concerns weren't just about ego, they were about partnership, mutual respect, and the importance of supporting each other's personal growth. She began to understand that their ministry couldn't thrive if they didn't both have room to grow individually. She knew that if she wanted to succeed, she had to give Tor the freedom to explore his own calling, even if it meant stepping out of her shadow. For the first time, Sarah and Tor saw their partnership in a completely new light. It wasn't about her being the main leader and him being the follower. It was about them working together as equals, each bringing their own strengths to the table. As Sarah embraced this new perspective, Tor also started to explore new opportunities. He began taking on more visible roles within the ministry, not just as her husband, but as a leader in his own right. The church, though initially unsure of his place, started to see his value as well. Tor wasn't just a support system for Sarah. He was a force in his own right, and his contributions began to shape the future of the church alongside hers. But just when it seemed like everything was falling into place, an unexpected turn of events shook their world once again. A scandal rocked the church, one that threatened to undo everything Sarah and Tor had worked so hard to build. The accusations were severe, and they came from an unlikely source, someone close to the ministry. The controversy spread like wildfire, and soon the public was questioning everything. Could Sarah and Tor weather the storm, or would this be the end of their journey? What made this scandal even more devastating was that it wasn't just about the allegations. It was about trust. People who had been part of the Potter's house for years began to question Sarah's leadership, and some even wondered if the entire ministry was built on a false foundation. The couple was forced to face their deepest fears, both personally and professionally. Could they rise above this scandal and restore their reputation? Or was this the moment that would bring everything crashing down? What if I told you that one of the most well-known pastors in the world, T.D. Jakes, the head of the Potter's House, made an unbelievable decision to step down from his powerful position? It was shocking, wasn't it? A man who had spent decades building his ministry, leading one of the largest and most influential churches in the world, suddenly made the choice to walk away. But the craziest part? No one really knew why. Everyone had their own guesses, health problems, family issues, maybe even a scandal. Yet, no one had the truth. No one could answer the question, why? But here's where it gets interesting. For months, rumors ran wild, but it wasn't until his daughter, Sarah Jakes Roberts, finally broke her silence that the real reason was revealed. You won't believe what she had to say. People thought it was all about him getting older, perhaps struggling with his health, but Sarah exposed a whole different side of the story. And trust me, this story changes everything you thought you knew about the Jakes family. The truth? It's shocking, emotional, and downright unexpected. It all started when T.D. Jakes, the towering figure of the Christian community, a man whose sermons touched millions, decided to step aside. For years, he was the face of faith for so many people. His leadership not only shaped the church, but influenced the entertainment industry too. Yet, one day, without any prior warning, he made the decision to leave. The public was in a frenzy. Was he sick? Was there a scandal brewing behind the scenes? Or was it something else altogether? Nobody could figure it out. And while the world speculated, there was one person who had the answers, his daughter, Sarah. When Sarah finally spoke up, her words sent shockwaves across the church and the world. The decision wasn't as simple as it seemed. It wasn't just a man getting older or getting sick. No, it was something much deeper than that. T.D. Jakes wasn't stepping down because he had to. He was stepping down because he chose to. And it wasn't about weakness like many thought. It was about wisdom. But let me tell you, this wasn't a decision that came easily. The pressures of leading one of the world's largest megachurches had been weighing on T.D. Jakes for years. His daughter, Sarah, opened up about how her father had been struggling with the enormous burden of balancing his personal life with the demands of his ministry. There were moments when T.D. Jakes questioned whether he was even fulfilling his true purpose anymore. Despite his massive success, something was missing. His spiritual journey had reached a point where he had to ask himself, am I doing what I'm meant to do? It was during this internal battle that T.D. Jakes made the gut-wrenching decision to step away. Sarah shared that her father realized he couldn't keep going at the same pace. The toll of managing a global ministry was taking a heavy emotional, mental, and physical toll on him. What many people didn't know was that the powerful leader behind the pulpit was battling exhaustion, guilt, and a deep sense of dissatisfaction. He had been giving so much of himself to others, to the church, that he was losing touch with the things that mattered most: his health, his family, and his own peace of mind. This wasn't just about giving up his leadership position for the sake of his health. There was more to it. T.D. Jakes, as Sarah revealed, came to a realization that to truly honor his faith, he had to step aside and let someone else take the reins. And that's exactly what he did. It wasn't about weakness. It was about being wise enough to understand that it was time for a new chapter. It was about trusting the future of the church to those who could bring fresh vision and leadership. But here's where it gets shocking. Sarah didn't just say her father was stepping down because of his health. She revealed something even deeper. T.D. Jakes had been struggling with his spiritual identity. For someone who had built an empire and become a spiritual icon, admitting that he was spiritually exhausted was something no one saw coming. It wasn't about health problems or personal failure. It was about something more profound. a deep spiritual questioning that many leaders go through but rarely speak about. T.D. Jakes had reached a point in his life where he no longer felt connected to the very ministry he had poured his heart and soul into for years. And that's when Sarah said something that really stopped everyone in their tracks. She explained that her father's decision to step away wasn't just for his own good. It was for the future of the church. He wanted to ensure that the next generation could step up and take it to new heights. For T.D. Jakes, the church was not just about him. It was about the legacy he left behind in the future of the ministry. You see, Sarah had always been in the shadow of her father's towering presence, trying to carve out her own path while following in his footsteps. But the truth was, no one really understood the pressure she was under. People saw her as the next in line, the obvious successor, but they didn't know the full story. Sarah had been fighting her own inner demons, struggling with her identity and purpose. She wasn't sure if she was ready to step into the limelight, especially after everything her father had built. The weight of the family legacy was heavy on her shoulders, and sometimes it felt like it might break her. The pressure had been mounting for years. She had already been involved in the ministry for a long time, but now, with her father stepping down, all eyes were on her. Could she lead in the same way? Could she connect with the congregation the way her father had? For Sarah, this wasn't just a matter of stepping up to the pulpit. It was about stepping into an identity that she wasn't sure she could own. The idea of carrying the weight of the Potter's house, an institution built on decades of trust, faith, and devotion, was both exhilarating and terrifying. But here's the twist. Sarah didn't just feel unprepared because of the ministry's size or her father's shadow. She had been quietly battling feelings of doubt and insecurity for years. No one had known about the late-night phone calls with friends, the tears she shed in private, or the moments when she thought she might not be cut out for the job. In fact, at one point, she even considered walking away from it all. But just when she was about to give up, something changed. Sarah found herself faced with an emotional turning point, a defining moment that would alter the course of her life forever. She had always been a strong woman, but she wasn't sure if she could live up to the impossible expectations placed on her. She questioned if she was ready to carry the weight of such a monumental responsibility. What was most surprising, however, was the source of her strength. It came from her father, T.D. Jakes. The very man who had been at the center of this entire storm became the one who helped her see beyond her fears. T.D. Jakes, despite all his struggles, became Sarah's greatest source of wisdom. In the middle of his own personal battle, he managed to offer the guidance she needed. In a heartfelt conversation between father and daughter, T.D. Jakes shared something that would change Sarah's perspective forever. He told her that leadership wasn't about perfection. It was about authenticity. It was about embracing who she was, flaws and all, and trusting that her journey would unfold in its own way. And here's where it gets interesting. T.D. Jakes didn't just tell her what she wanted to hear. He was brutally honest. He made her face the truth. She was never going to fill his shoes. And that was okay. The world didn't need another T.D. Jakes. It needed her. He told Sarah that she had to find her own voice and her own way of leading. The pressure wasn't on her to replicate his success. It was on her to bring something new, something fresh to the table. That conversation with her father marked a turning point for Sarah. She realized that she didn't need to follow in his footsteps. She didn't need to be the perfect successor. All she had to do was be true to herself and trust that God would guide her through the rest. This realization gave her the courage to embrace her new role as a leader, but it also opened up a whole new set of challenges. As Sarah began to step into the leadership role, she quickly realized that the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. The church, while huge, was also divided in some ways. Not everyone was convinced that she could handle the pressure. Some members of the congregation still saw her as T.D. Jakes' daughter, not as a leader in her own right. The transition was more complicated than she had ever imagined. There were whispers behind her back doubts about whether she could live up to her father's legacy, and the constant comparison to the man who had been a spiritual giant for decades. But Sarah wasn't going to give up that easily. She began to find her own rhythm. She spoke passionately about the future of the church, offering a vision that was rooted in compassion, inclusivity, and a focus on real life issues. She connected with people in ways that her father never could, especially the younger generation who were looking for a fresh perspective on faith. It wasn't long before the church began to see Sarah not as a shadow of her father, but as a leader in her own right. But there was still one piece of the puzzle missing, and it came in the form of her husband, Tor Roberts. The couple had always been supportive of each other, but now, as Sarah took on this monumental role, Tor's role in the church was about to be questioned in ways neither of them had anticipated. As Sarah and Tor continued to weather the storm of scandal and controversy, they quickly realized that their fight wasn't just about defending their names, it was about something much deeper. It was about the very foundation of their faith. This wasn't just a battle in the public eye. It was a spiritual battle that forced them to confront the deepest parts of their relationship with God and with each other. The pain, the uncertainty, the whispers of doubt, all of it pushed them to a breaking point. But in those moments of darkness, something miraculous began to unfold. Sarah, who had always been the strong, confident leader, found herself questioning everything. She wondered if she had been too focused on building her father's legacy and whether she had lost sight of what truly mattered. The pressure of being in the spotlight, of living up to the expectations of millions, had taken a toll on her. She had always seen herself as the person who could hold everything together. But now, she realized that the weight of the world was far too much for any one person to bear. It wasn't about her being perfect or living up to the image the world had created for her. It was about being real, being vulnerable, and being open to the lessons God was trying to teach her in the midst of her brokenness. And Tor, too, had been forced to confront the cracks in his own identity. For so long, he had lived in Sarah's shadow, trying to be the supportive husband, the quiet partner. But now, as the scandal tore through their lives, he realized that his silence wasn't helping anyone, not Sarah, not the church, and certainly not himself. Tor had spent so much time trying to be the perfect partner, the perfect man, but he had neglected the one person who mattered most, himself. Now, he understood that he had a voice, a role to play in their ministry, not just as Sarah's husband, but as Tor Roberts, a man with his own calling. The challenge was no longer about whether he could step into the spotlight. It was about whether he was ready to face the painful truths of his own heart and move forward with confidence, knowing that he, too, had a purpose to fulfill. Together, Sarah and Tor took the difficult step of confronting the accusations head on. They didn't shy away from the pain or the discomfort of their situation. Instead, they leaned into it, trusting that God would guide them through. They worked tirelessly to clear their names, but they also knew that the true test of their faith wasn't in the outcome of the scandal. It was in how they handled it. Would they continue to stand strong, even when the world seemed to crumble around them? Would they allow this to break them? Or would they use it as an opportunity to rebuild their lives and their ministry on a stronger, more authentic foundation? The turning point came when they decided to open up to their congregation, not as perfect leaders, but as imperfect people who had fallen, struggled, and risen again. Sarah and Tor shared their pain, their doubts, and their fears, not in a way that sought sympathy, but in a way that invited others into their journey. They showed their vulnerability, their human side, and in doing so, they connected with their people in a way that was deeper than any sermon or performance ever could. The church began to heal, not because of their words, but because of their willingness to be real, to admit that they weren't perfect, but that their faith was still unshakable. The scandal didn't destroy Sarah and Tor, it transformed them. What once seemed like an insurmountable obstacle became the catalyst for a deeper, more authentic ministry. The backlash faded, the whispers died down, and the Roberts family began to rebuild. But this time it was different. They weren't trying to live up to someone else's expectations. They were building something that was uniquely theirs, a ministry grounded in authenticity, vulnerability, and above all, faith. In the years that followed, Sarah and Tor Roberts became symbols of resilience and redemption. They didn't just survive the scandal, they thrived because of it. The lessons they learned in the darkest moments of their lives became the cornerstone of their ministry, teaching others that no matter how deep the pain or how heavy the burden, God could always bring something beautiful out of the ashes. Their story wasn't one of perfection or of having it all together. It was a story of transformation, of a family that had been through the fire and come out stronger on the other side.